The trembling widow clutched her late husband's crumpled debt notice, her curvy frame swallowed by a cheap black morning dress that was 2 sizes too tight across her chest. She had walked into the most dangerous man in Boston's private tower begging for any job. Dishwashing, laundry, scrubbing toilets. Anything to feed her 2 small children before the eviction notice on her door became reality. But when the Mafia boss finally looked into her tear-swollen eyes, he did not offer her a job. He slid a loaded pistol across his mahogany desk, met her gaze without blinking, and spoke 6 words that would change her life forever. "From tonight, you belong to me." She did not yet know that accepting the protection of Cashinvas would make her the most hunted woman on the entire East Coast, or that before the week was over, 3 men would already be dead because of her. The air inside the Ravenna building always smelled of Cuban cigars, aged bourbon, and old money. Nestled at the base of Boston's Beacon Hill, rising 47 stories of black glass and stone gargoyles over the financial district, the tower was the kind of place where senators requested private meetings through encrypted channels, and hedge fund billionaires waited 3 months for an audience. It was also the beating heart of the Voss Syndicate, an ancient Sicilian-American criminal empire that controlled the shipping lanes from Providence to Portland, half of New England's private banking, and every whispered secret in between. It was into this glittering fortress of power that Isabella Marchetti walked on a rainy Tuesday morning, clutching a damp resume printed on cheap copy paper. Isabella, called Bella by the few people left who loved her, was 29 years old and had been a widow for exactly 6 months. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall and carried 210 pounds on a curvaceous frame that 2 pregnancies and half a year of grief-eating had softened into full, generous hips, and a bust her cheap morning dress could barely contain. Her dark chestnut hair was pulled back into an exhausted knot at the nape of her neck, and the black fabric of her only funeral dress had faded to a dull charcoal from too many washes. She looked exactly like what she was, a working-class widow drowning in circumstances she never asked for, wearing the last dignified thing she owned into a building that cost more per square foot than she would earn in a decade. Her husband Marco had been killed 4 months earlier in what the Boston police called a random mugging outside his failing restaurant in Somerville. Bella had never believed that story. Marco had been carrying almost no cash. His wallet had been left behind, and his wedding ring had still been on his finger when the coroner returned it to her in a plastic bag. But the detectives had shrugged, filed the case, and moved on to homicides with better witnesses. What they had left Bella with was $147,000 in debt to men she had never met, a mailbox full of collection notices, and 2 children who still asked every night when Papa was coming home. Sophia was 6 years old. Luca had just turned 4. And in 11 days, the 3 of them would be evicted from their tiny Somerville apartment because Bella had not made rent in 3 months. She had applied to 34 jobs. She had been rejected from every single one. Nobody wanted to hire a widow with no college degree, 2 small children who needed daycare, and a body that did not fit the aesthetic standard of the restaurants and boutiques and offices where she had once dreamed of working. And then, 3 days ago, the voicemails had started. A man with a heavy Eastern European accent calling from a block number, always with the same message. "You have 1 week to pay what your husband owed us, Cara, or the children will pay instead." That was when Bella had gone to her grandmother's old restaurant in the North End, the one that had closed after Nana's death, and had knelt at the woman's grave in the pouring rain, and had remembered the last words her grandmother had ever whispered to her from the hospital bed. "If you are ever truly lost, mi Estella, find the Raven in Boston. Your grandfather saved his father's life once, long ago. The debt is still owed. His name is Voss." Which was how, on that rainy Tuesday morning, Bella Marchetti found herself standing in the marble lobby of the Ravenna building with her ruined resume in her shaking hands and her cheeks burning as the security guard looked her up and down with barely concealed pity. She was directed to a private elevator that required a retinal scan just to operate, and when the doors finally opened onto the 43rd floor, she stepped out into a reception area so opulent it made her physically dizzy. The floors were black marble veined with gold. The walls were lined with first edition books in 4 languages behind museum-quality glass. and standing directly in her path, blocking her from moving another step, was a woman who looked at Bella the way a butcher looks at meat. Her name was Dominica Voss. She was Cashin's cousin by marriage, the unofficial manager of his estate and his empire's social calendar. And she was everything Bella was not. Tall, thin ice blonde, wearing a Chanel skirt suit that cost more than a used car, with cheekbones sharp enough to draw blood and eyes as cold as the Boston Harbor in January. She plucked Bella's damp resume from her trembling fingers before Bella could speak, held it up between two manicured fingernails as if it were something diseased, and began to read aloud in a voice that carried across the entire reception area. "Isabella Marchetti," Dominica announced, loud enough for the 4 security guards flanking the walls to hear every word. "High school diploma. Former waitress at Nana's Kitchen, a restaurant that closed. Stay-at-home mother. Recently widowed. Oh, this is precious. She wants to apply for a housekeeping position at MY Building." Dominica lowered the paper and slowly looked Bella up and down, taking in every curve of her plus-size body squeezed into the tight black dress. "Sweetheart, look at yourself. We have a dress code here. And a weight limit. Our uniforms don't come in your size. And I doubt we could commission one in time for you to fit through the service doors. Perhaps try the fast food place across the street? They're always desperate. And so apparently are you." The security guards looked at the floor. One of them, a massive Sicilian named Rocco, actually winced. Bella's face burned so hot she thought her skin might blister. She reached out with a shaking hand to take her resume back, and Dominica, with the practiced grace of a woman who had done cruel things 1,000 times, tilted her wrist and let her scalding espresso pour in a slow, deliberate arc down the entire front of Bella's black dress. The cup clattered to the marble floor. Bella's resume papers scattered. And Bella Marchetti, widow, mother of 2, $147,000 in debt, hunted by men she had never met, dropped to her knees on the black marble in front of 4 armed guards and 1 designer-clad viper, and began silently gathering her wet, ruined papers with tears streaming down her face. What Bella did not know, what Dominica did not know, what none of the 4 security guards had thought to check, was that Cashin Voss had returned from his morning meeting 7 minutes earlier than expected. His office door had been open the entire time. He had been standing in the doorway for the last 90 seconds, one hand wrapped around a crystal tumbler of aged bourbon, his knuckles slowly turning white, his dark eyes tracking every syllable of Dominica's cruelty. And now, as Bella knelt on his marble floor gathering wet paper like a beggar in his own house, Cashin Voss set his glass down on a side table with a soft, deliberate click that somehow made the entire reception area go silent. Cashin Voss was 36 years old, 6 feet 2 inches of coiled violence packed into a bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit that had been hand-stitched for him in Milan. His jawline had been carved from granite. His dark hair was cut precisely, with just enough silver at the temples to suggest wisdom rather than age, and his eyes were the color of black coffee, bottomless, watchful, and utterly without warmth when he was displeased. He was the head of the Voss family, one of the oldest and most feared syndicates in North America, and he was displeased now in a way that made the temperature of the marble reception area drop 10 degrees in 3 seconds. He did not speak to Bella. He did not speak to the security guards. He looked only at his cousin. "Dominica," he said, and his voice was a low, gravelly baritone that could have cut glass. "You will apologize to Mrs. Marchetti, and you will do it in Sicilian. Since you seem to enjoy critiquing people who speak languages you clearly never bothered to learn." Dominica's mouth opened, then closed. Her flawless composure cracked visibly for the first time in her adult life. Because Dominica Voss had married into the family, she had never learned the ancestral tongue. She spoke restaurant menu Italian at best, and every man in that reception area knew it. Her face went from porcelain to crimson in the space of a single breath. And still, on her knees on the marble floor, Bella Marchetti slowly stopped gathering her papers. She raised her head. She looked at Dominica. And then, in a voice that trembled only slightly, in the flawless aristocratic Sicilian that her grandmother had taught her every summer of her childhood in the kitchen of Nana's Kitchen, she spoke. "Mia nonna diceva sempre che una vera signora si riconosce dai modi, non divestiti. Tu cara, appena dimostrato di non essere nessuna del due cose. My grandmother used to say a true lady is recognized by her manners, not her clothes. You, my dear, have just proven yourself to be neither. The reception area went absolutely, catastrophically silent. Rocco, the Sicilian security guard, let out a single sharp bark of laughter before he could stop himself. Victor, the enormous Russian standing beside him, allowed one eyebrow to lift half an inch, the closest thing to shock that a former Spetsnaz operator ever permitted himself. And Cashin Voss, the most dangerous man in Boston, looked at the curvy widow kneeling on his marble floor with wet espresso, soaking her cheap black dress. And something dangerous and unfamiliar moved behind his black eyes. He did not smile. He did not move. But he slowly, deliberately walked across the marble floor, bent down, and offered Bella his hand. If you're already rooting for Bella, do me a favor right now and smash that like button. Because trust me, what happens in the next 60 seconds is going to give you chills. Hit subscribe so you don't miss part 2 of the story. Because the moment Cashin Voss picks up that resume, everything changes. Bella stared at his outstretched hand for a full 2 seconds before her trembling fingers found his. His palm was warm, calloused in places a banker's would not be, and his grip was absolute, as if he were pulling her not just off the floor, but out of an entire nightmare her life had become. He did not let go of her hand as he turned to Dominica, and his voice, when he spoke, was so quiet that every person in the room had to lean forward to hear it. Dominica, you will personally deliver a full designer wardrobe to my Beacon Hill estate by nightfall, tailored in her actual measurements. If a single garment does not fit Signora Marchetti perfectly, you will be answering to me personally. And the espresso stain on her dress, he leaned in close enough that only Dominica could hear the last part. If I ever see you disrespect a Ferrari granddaughter again, the next stain on marble will not wash out. Am I clear? Dominica curtsied. She actually physically curtsied, something no one in that building had ever seen her do, and fled down the corridor without another word. Cashin did not watch her go. He turned to Bella, and for the first time since he had emerged from his office, his voice softened by a single degree. Signora Marchetti, please, come inside, and forgive my house for what has just happened in it. He guided her, still holding her hand, through the enormous carved doors of his private office. The room beyond was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the churning gray waters of Boston Harbor, a mahogany desk carved from a single ancient tree, walls lined with priceless books, and mounted under museum glass on the far wall, a Renaissance-era dagger with a raven engraved into its silver hilt. Cashin removed his own suit jacket without hesitation, draped it over Bella's shoulders to cover the ruined front of her dress, and personally poured her a glass of iced water from a crystal decanter before gesturing for her to sit in the leather chair across from his desk. Bella sat because her knees would not hold her any longer. She clutched the jacket around her shoulders. It smelled of sandalwood gunpowder and something ancient she could not name, and watched as Cashin picked up one of the damp pages of her resume from where she had set them on his desk. He read for a long moment. His expression did not change. And then he said the word that stopped Bella's heart. Marchetti. He looked up, his black eyes locked onto hers. Isabella Marchetti, née Ferrari. Bella's throat went dry. She nodded once. Cashin set the paper down very carefully, as if it were suddenly made of glass. He walked slowly around his desk, sat on the edge of it directly in front of her, and folded his large, scarred hands in his lap. When he spoke again, his voice had changed entirely. It was no longer the voice of a Mafia boss addressing a woman who had walked in off the street. It was the voice of a man who had just recognized a debt older than he was. You are Tommaso Ferrari's granddaughter, he said quietly. The bookkeeper who worked at Nana's kitchen in the North End. He was my grandfather, Bella whispered. He died when I was 17. My grandmother, his wife, Rosa, she raised me after my parents passed. She told me, before she died last year, that if I was ever truly lost, I should find the Raven in Boston. She said your father owed our family a debt. Cashin was silent for a very long time. His eyes moved to the raven engraved on the dagger under glass on his wall. And when he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than it had been. In the winter of 1987, my father was ambushed by 4 men from a rival family in the alley behind Nana's kitchen. He would have been killed in that alley. He was 31 years old, and I was 1 year old at home with my mother. Your grandfather, Tommaso Ferrari, a bookkeeper who had never fired a gun in his life, heard the shots from the kitchen where he was closing the books for the night. He came out of that back door with your grandmother's cast iron pan, and he killed 2 of those men before the other 2 ran. He saved my father's life. He saved my life. And when my father tried to pay him, tried to give him anything, tried to bring him into the family, your grandfather refused every single offer. He said only one thing. He said, "One day my blood may need yours. On that day, you will answer." Cashin looked back at her. And Isabella Marchetti, kneeling widow, mother of 2, $147,000 in debt, understood in that moment that she had not walked into that building looking for a housekeeping job. She had walked into it to collect a debt that had been waiting 38 years to be paid. "Now tell me, Isabella," Cashin said softly, leaning forward, his dark eyes burning into hers. "Tell me who is threatening your children. Tell me who killed your husband. And tell me exactly what you need. Because tonight I answer." Bella took a shuddering breath, wrapped Cashin's jacket tighter around her shoulders, and told him everything. She told him about Marco's failing restaurant, about the $80,000 he had borrowed from men he refused to name, about the phone calls that had started 3 days after his funeral, about the coroner returning his wedding ring in a plastic bag, and the detectives who had shrugged and closed the file within a week. She told him about the Eastern European accent on the voicemails, about the eviction notice, about Sophia asking every night when Papa was coming home, about Luca, who had stopped speaking for 2 full months after the funeral, and had only just begun to say words again. She told him about the last threat, the one that had come at 3 in the morning 2 nights ago. "The children will pay instead." And when she finished, her voice shaking, her hands wrapped around the crystal glass so tightly her knuckles had gone white, Cashin Voss did not speak for a full 30 seconds. He simply stared at the harbor through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and his jaw tightened by degrees until Bella could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. Then he pressed a small silver button on his desk, and within 90 seconds, 3 people entered the office. The first was Matteo, his consigliere, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with a silver-flecked beard and the calm demeanor of a chess grandmaster. The second was Victor, the massive Russian security chief Bella had already seen in the lobby. The third was a small woman in her late 20s with a shaved head, tattoos crawling up her neck, and a laptop tucked under her arm. Kira, Cashin's cyber specialist. Cashin gestured for Bella to remain seated. He did not send her out of the room, and when he spoke as if she were already family. "The Volkov Bratva," he said, and Kira's fingers immediately began flying across her laptop keyboard. "Their debt collection division has been operating in Somerville for the last 18 months. Marco Marchetti's restaurant was on their list. Pull every transaction, every phone record, every associate. I want to know which one of Yuri Volkov's dogs made those phone calls, and I want to know by sunset." Bella's head snapped up. Yuri Volkov. Cashin's eyes met hers. The second son of the Volkov Pakon. He has been trying to muscle into Voss territory for 2 years. He targets small immigrant businesses, restaurants, laundromats, corner grocers, because their owners are too afraid of deportation to go to the police. He loans them money at rates designed to guarantee default. And when they cannot pay, he takes their businesses, their savings, and sometimes their lives. I have been trying to build a case against him for 8 months. Every witness I have found has either disappeared or recanted. He leaned forward across the desk. "Isabella, I need you to understand something. Your husband was not killed in a random mugging. He was killed as a message to every other business owner on Yuri's list. And the phone calls to you, the threats against your children, they are not about the money. They are about closing a loose end. Marco found something before he died. Something that scared them enough to kill him. And they believe you know what it was." Bella's blood went cold. She thought of the shoebox under her bed, the one Marco had asked her to hide 3 weeks before his death. The one she had never opened, because she could not bear to touch anything of his after the funeral. She had assumed it contained love letters or photographs, or perhaps the deed to a plot in the cemetery. She said this out loud, in a small voice, and Mateo the consigliere went very still. Cashin's expression did not change, but his hand slowly closed into a fist on the surface of his desk. "Victor," he said quietly, "take 2 men. Escort Signora Marchetti to her apartment. Retrieve the box. Retrieve the children. Retrieve anything of sentimental value. You have 40 minutes. If the Volkov are watching the building, and they will be, do not engage unless engaged. Bring everyone back to the Beacon Hill estate. The East Wing has been prepared." "Prepared?" Bella asked, dazed. Cashin looked at her with the faintest ghost of something almost like a smile. "Signora, I made the calls the moment you sat down in that chair. Your children have rooms. Sophia's is painted lavender because your resume listed her favorite color under emergency contact information, a detail no interviewer bothered to notice. Luca's has a bookshelf already filled with picture books in Italian and English. There is a nanny, a woman I trust with my own life, who raised me after my mother died, waiting to meet them. There are clothes in their sizes. There is food they will actually eat. And there is a private tutor arriving Monday morning, because your children will not be attending public school in Somerville until Yuri Volkov is no longer breathing free air." Bella's throat closed. She could not speak. Cashin slid the pistol across the desk toward her, a small, elegant Beretta, matte black, waited for a woman's hand. Beside it he placed a black credit card with no name and no visible limit, and beside that, a folded document in formal legal Italian. "The pistol is, for the days I am not standing beside you. You will learn to use it by Friday. Victor will teach you personally. The card is for anything you or the children need, clothes, medical care, tuition, ice cream at midnight, I do not care. There is no limit and no accounting required. The contract is a formal declaration of protection under the old code. From the moment you sign it, my name is your shield. Every associate of every family from Providence to Portland will know that harming you is the same as declaring war on the Voss. And Isabella," his voice dropped, "when I find the man who killed your husband, and I will find him, you will decide his fate. Not me. You. This is not my vengeance. This is yours. I am simply the instrument." Bella looked at the 3 items on the desk. She looked at the man across from her, and she understood, with terrifying clarity, that she was standing at the exact edge of 2 entirely different lives. She could refuse the pistol, refuse the card, refuse the contract, and walk out of this building with her resume and her ruined dress and her eviction notice, and be dead within 72 hours along with her children. Or she could pick up the pen and become something she had never imagined being. Something dangerous. Something protected. Something no longer alone. She picked up the pen. She signed her name. And when she looked up, Cashin Voss was looking at her the way a man looks at a woman who has just walked willingly into his life carrying a lit match. If you are watching this and your heart is pounding, please do me one more favor. Smash that like button right now. This story is climbing because of viewers exactly like you. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it in the next 5 seconds, because what happens when Bella opens Marco's shoebox is going to change everything. The Beacon Hill estate was a fortress disguised as a mansion. 12,000 square feet of granite and ivy on a walled acre in the most exclusive neighborhood in Boston, with 3 layers of security. Bella did not even notice until Victor pointed them out. When she arrived that evening with Sophia and Luca clutching her hands, the children stopped dead at the foot of the sweeping marble staircase. Sophia looked up at the crystal chandelier. Luca looked at Cashin, who had bent down to his exact eye level and was holding out a small wrapped package containing a stuffed lion. Luca, who had not hugged a stranger in 6 months, walked directly into Cashin's arms. And Bella, watching from the doorway, felt something inside her chest crack open that she had thought was permanently sealed. That night, after the children were asleep in their new rooms under the watchful eye of the nanny Signora Rossetti, Bella brought Marco's shoebox down to Cashin's private study. She sat on the leather couch beside him, the fire crackling in the enormous stone hearth, and she opened the box for the first time. Inside were not love letters. Inside was a USB drive, 3 notebooks filled with Marco's cramped handwriting, and a single photograph of a man Bella did not recognize. Heavy-set, bald, standing in front of a warehouse on Boston Harbor with 2 other men she did recognize. One of them was Yuri Volkov, whose face Kira had shown her earlier that evening. The other was a Boston city councilman whose re-election posters had been hanging on lampposts all over Somerville for the past 6 weeks. Cashin went very still. Kira, who had been summoned within minutes, plugged the USB into an air-gapped laptop and began to work. Within an hour, she looked up with an expression Bella had never seen on her face before, something between awe and fury. "Your husband," Kira said quietly, "was not just a restaurant owner. He was building a case. Bank statements, shipping manifests, wire transfers between shell companies. He had traced the entire Volkov laundering operation through 11 different restaurants in Somerville and Cambridge. And Cashin," she turned the laptop toward him. "Councilman Bergen is on the payroll. Marco had photographs of the payments, timestamps, everything." Bella began to shake. Marco had not been a failing restaurant owner. Marco had been a man who had discovered a monster living in his neighborhood, and instead of running, instead of paying, he had spent the last 6 months of his life quietly building a case that would have destroyed an empire. He had died protecting his family from something Bella had not even known existed. And she looked at the pages of his handwriting, the neat columns of numbers, the careful annotations in the margins, and she recognized his method immediately. It was her father's method. It was the forensic accounting her father had taught her at their kitchen table when she was 12 years old, before he had died and left her nothing but a shoebox of ledgers and a memory of long division done with a mechanical pencil. She reached for the notebooks. "May I?" Cashin nodded. And Bella Marchetti, high school diploma, former waitress, Curvy widow of a dead restaurateur, spent the next 6 hours on that leather couch, reading her dead husband's work, cross-referencing shipping manifests with wire timestamps, and finding what neither Kira nor Matteo nor any of Cashin's forensic accountants had been able to find in 8 months. She found the routing number, the single routing number that Yuri Volkov's people had used 3 times when they thought no one was watching, the number that tied 14 shell companies to a single Cayman Islands account. The number that would collapse the entire Volkov financial architecture the moment it was handed to the right federal prosecutor. She looked up at 3:47 in the morning. Cashin was watching her from the armchair across the room, a glass of untouched bourbon in his hand. She said only 3 words. "I found it." Cashin set down the bourbon and walked across the study. He did not speak. He simply took her face gently in his large, scarred hands, and he looked at her as if she were something impossible, something he had not believed existed until that exact moment, and he pressed his forehead against hers and said, in a voice so low she almost missed it, "Your grandfather did not save my father for a debt, Isabella. He saved him so that you and I could sit in this room, 38 years later, and end this war together." The Volkovs struck the estate at 4:12 that same morning. 3 men came over the north wall with suppressed rifles. Victor took 2 of them before they reached the servants' entrance. Cashin took the 3rd himself in the courtyard, personally, and Bella watched from the top of the staircase with the Beretta held steady in both hands the way Victor had shown her, and her hands did not shake, not once. The surviving intruder, the one Cashin did not kill, gave up Yuri Volkov's location within 40 minutes of Victor's interrogation in the wine cellar. And by dawn, Kira's data package was already in the hands of the FBI Organized Crime Task Force. By noon, 17 Volkov shell companies were frozen. By 3 in the afternoon, 3 of their casinos in Providence had been raided. By 7 that evening, the Volkov shipping arm was under full federal seizure. Councilman Bergen had been arrested at Logan Airport attempting to board a flight to Zurich, and Yuri Volkov himself had been intercepted at his Miami penthouse by a joint federal task force acting on a warrant Kira had helped draft. His father, the Pakhan, publicly disowned him within 24 hours to protect the rest of the family. His mistress left him before the arraignment. His accounts were empty. His name was ruined. His empire was ash. And 2 nights later, Cashin brought him to Bella, bound, kneeling, in the same wine cellar where Victor had done his work. "You said she would decide his fate," Cashin said quietly, looking at Bella across the low stone room. I keep my word, she decides. Yuri Volkov, a man who had ordered the murder of her husband, who had left her children fatherless, who had threatened Sofia and Luca in voicemails at 3 in the morning, looked up at Bella from his knees with fury and terror mixed on his face. She looked back at him for a very long time. She thought of Marco. She thought of the 6 months of grief. She thought of Luca finally saying words again in his lavender-painted bedroom upstairs. And when she finally spoke, her voice was perfectly steady. I do not want him dead. Death is a mercy. I want him to live the rest of his natural life in a federal cell, knowing that the fat little widow he tried to break used her dead husband's notebooks and her own 2 hands to end his entire empire. Give him to the prosecutors, Cashin. Every file, every witness, every account number. Let him rot for 40 years thinking about me. Cashin looked at her the way a man looks at the woman he has just decided he cannot live without. He nodded once. And by Monday morning, Yuri Volkov was in federal custody, facing a 217-count indictment that would keep him in a supermax facility until he was an old man. Take 3 seconds right now and hit that like button if you cheered when Bella made that choice. And please, for the love of every woman who has ever been underestimated, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. She might need it more than you know. 3 weeks passed. The Beacon Hill estate slowly transformed from a fortress into a home. Sofia's laughter echoed in the marble hallways. Luca spoke complete sentences again, first in English, then in Italian, and then one memorable morning at breakfast in the aristocratic Sicilian his mother had taught him from her grandmother's kitchen. Signora Rossetti spoiled the children shamelessly. Victor taught Bella to shoot on the estate's private range every Tuesday and Thursday. And Cashin Voss, the most feared man in Boston, discovered that he did not actually enjoy bourbon nearly as much as he enjoyed sitting on the veranda in the early evening watching Isabella Marchetti read to her children in the garden. On a Saturday afternoon in late spring, when the estate's roses had begun to bloom in the private walled garden, Cashin found Bella walking barefoot along the gravel path in a tailored emerald dress that had been made for her body and no one else's. Her chestnut hair was loose down her back. Her curves had never looked more magnificent, and she had never known it until she caught him watching her from the veranda and forgot, for the first time in her adult life, to apologize for taking up space. He came down the steps and joined her by the old stone fountain. Without preamble, he handed her a folded legal document. She opened it. Inside was the deed to a beautifully restored brownstone in the North End, in her name alone, mortgage-free. Trust funds for Sofia and Luca that would carry them through Harvard and beyond. A cashier's check that erased every cent of Marco's debt. And a single-page letter of formal release from the contract she had signed that first afternoon in his office. Our arrangement is complete, Isabella, Cashin said quietly, looking not at her, but at the roses. Your grandfather's debt is paid. Yours is not owed. You are free to leave whenever you wish. My men will escort you and the children safely to any city in the world. You need only name it. Bella looked at the document for a long moment. Then she folded it very carefully, and she handed it back to him. You gave me protection when I only asked for a job, she said quietly. You gave me dignity when the whole world expected me to accept pity. You gave me my life back when I only asked for enough to survive 1 more month. And you did not fall for me because I was strong, Cashin. You saw me when I was on my knees on your marble floor, gathering wet paper with espresso soaking through the only dress I owned. You saw me at the lowest moment of my entire life. And you still saw a woman worth building a fortress around. She met his eyes. I am not leaving. Not because I owe you. Not because of my grandfather. Because for the first time in my life, someone looked at all of me. Every pound, every scar, every failure, every curve, every ounce of grief I was still carrying, and did not see something that needed to be fixed. He saw someone worth staying for. Cashin did not rush. He gave her every chance to step back. She did not. And when he finally kissed her, it was slow, reverent, and 38 years in the making. Somewhere behind them in the garden, Sofia's small voice called out, Mama, is Senior Cashin going to be our new papa now? and Cashin broke the kiss just long enough to kneel down in the grass at the little girl's eye level, take her tiny hand in his enormous scarred one, and answer with absolute gravity. Only if your mama says yes, Piccola. She is the boss in this family. Sophia thought about this very seriously. Then she nodded. Okay, but mama says yes. She already told me last night. And Bella Marchetti, Curvy widow, mother of two, forensic accountant, protected woman, the girl who had walked into the most dangerous building in Boston asking only for a job scrubbing toilets, threw back her head and laughed for the first time in 6 months, in the middle of a garden full of roses, in the arms of the man who had finally seen her. Bella walked into that tower asking for a job to feed her children. She walked out with a family, a fortune, a fortress of a man who understood that the strongest women in the world are almost always the ones the world has tried hardest to break. Marco's murder was avenged. The Volkov Empire was ash. And in the walled garden of a Beacon Hill mansion, a widow who had been told her whole life that she was too much finally learned, that she had always been exactly enough. Did Bella make the right choice, accepting the protection of Boston's most dangerous man? Or did she simply walk out of one nightmare and straight into another kind of fire? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. If you cheered when Bella took down an entire criminal empire with nothing but her dead husband's notebooks and her father's forensic training, smash that like button one more time. Share this story with every woman in your life who has ever been made to feel like she was too much, too soft, too curvy, or too broken to be loved fiercely. And subscribe right now, because next week's story is about a plus-size ER nurse who saved a dying stranger in an alley at 3 a.m. and did not realize she had just saved the life of the most feared cartel boss on the West Coast. You will not want to miss it.